For that reason, it was believed that Cooper would be found in this area, bordered by Lake Merwin to the north and ending 20 miles north of Portland, Oregon.
So the one thing that I want to point out, and something that's been raised before, was these wind conditions may have been off. And I would tend to think that they probably were off. I think they had, without looking at my notes, I don't know the exact degrees, but I can tell you, I mean, it was about like this. So maybe it was a little bit steeper, maybe it was a little less, okay, or maybe this wind speed was faster so that a quick pull would actually pull them out a little bit further, but you're only going to affect those drift line with the winds. You know, where the plane was actually flying, so this is north, this is south, where that plane is flying, okay, it might be off half a nautical mile to either side, but I mean, it's within a range. It's within a range, and we know that by the radar being tracked at PDX, McCord, on the military craft, and in Auburn. I mean, they were tracking this thing. So I guess the point I want to say is that the airspeed and the air direction, wind direction, and wind speed isn't really going to necessarily affect the zone, except maybe expand it just slightly. And by slightly, I mean maybe a quarter mile at the most. And that's probably being very generous. Or it's going to maybe alter it just slightly. It's not going to take the box, the landing area, and move it 20 miles. Okay, something like that. It's just going to expand, contract, depending on what kind of variables you throw in. But basically, they know about where the plane is at every point, and maybe those are off just by a margin. So we don't know, we can't pinpoint exactly where he jumped, we can't pinpoint exactly where he landed, but we know the general vicinity. Okay, it's very well established, it was very well accepted until February 1980, when they found something that caused them to maybe second guess. So one thing I wanted to point out though about this map, January 1972, that they tabulated, I mean, it was used, they used dummies, they dumped dummies out of a plane to see how far they would drift if there was a no pull. So they kind of pinpointed how far would he go on a no pull, how far would he go on a regular pull, what direction were the winds, and all this stuff. But the thing I want you to pay attention to, okay, so here's the flight path, right? Now we don't know if he's going right down the middle where we think he was, or if he's half a nautical mile here, or half a nautical mile here, creating a 1 nautical mile range. But one thing I want to talk about is, statistically speaking, you have margins of error, and generally your margins of error are 2 standard deviations. So you have 2 standard deviations to the left, 2 standard deviations, or to the left, to the right, and if a half nautical mile is 2 standard deviations, quarter nautical mile would be 1 standard deviation. The other thing that they did on this map is they did 1 minute before, 1 minute where we think he jumped, 1 minute later. So if 1 minute is 2 standard deviations, 1 standard deviation would be 30 seconds. So if you're talking about being off by like 5 minutes, that would be, what, 10 standard deviations off, okay? If you're talking about being 5 miles off, you're talking about 10 standard deviations. And that's just 5 miles in 5 minutes. Some of the stuff that gets thrown out is actually much, much greater than that. And if you want to look at statistics, 10 standard deviations is not even worth even talking about. I mean, 4 standard deviations isn't really even worth talking about. You know, any much more past 3 isn't really much worth talking about. So that would tell us that much more past 3/4 of a nautical mile on either side of that route isn't worth discussing. A minute and a half on either side of where we think he actually jumped at 8:12 isn't really worth discussing. In fact, it was so well established that Cooper landed in this area that not only did they pour all their manpower and search and stuff for like 2 weeks, and all the helicopters and everything, that not only did they put all the time, energy, effort into searching, one guy actually settled with Global Insurance to have the right to find the money, and they would split it up. So what he did is when he made this, he was so confident, he put his own money up front, bought this big, huge submarine, and went down to Lake Merwin, days at a time even, and was searching the entire lake with a submarine, and never found a thing. Because up until that point, for the 7.5, 8 years, they figured, well, we don't know where he is, no one ever found him. They found this placard, but they didn't find him. And by the way, the placard pretty much shows the plane isn't off the screen, the plane's pretty much on course. But people thought maybe Cooper landed in Lake Merwin. There was a report of a white object floating. They thought maybe that was his parachute canopy. And this guy that searched with a submarine pretty much proved he was not in Lake Merwin. So for more than 8 years, there was endless speculation about what happened to this D.B. Cooper. Where's the money? What happened? Where did he go? And no one really knew, and every speculation was as good as the next, and everyone had a theory, and did he die? Did he not die? Did he make it? The popular thing was he was in Mexico, sipping on margaritas and tequila. But what really happened to him?
To this day, Cooper, who he is, where he is, and where the $200,000 are, remain a mystery.
No one really knew. And then February 10th, 1980 came along. In the next video, I'm going to discuss the find of the century, and I do see it that way, and the most pivotal clue in this case, for it will give you the answers if you're willing to look through the lens of logic.